This is not the version that the story told, but the version it has tried to hide.
On the Roman side, including the consuls, only 10,000 managed to break out, and together with those who had stayed behind in the camp earlier, the total number of survivors was just 15,000. After this battle, out of 4 legions, only 1.5 remained. On Hannibal's side, most of the casualties were Gauls. The number of soldiers he had brought from Spain who died was negligible. As for the elephants, they were either killed or ran away, with only 1 remaining. Due to the terrible weather, Hannibal did not continue the pursuit after his victory, so the 17-year-old Scipio once again managed to escape. After this battle, the Gallic tribes who had been watching from the sidelines all flocked to join Hannibal's ranks. Hannibal's army quickly swelled to 50,000 men. In the first year of his campaign against Rome, Hannibal finally brought it to a perfect close. But for all of Italy, the nightmare was only just beginning. Hannibal was truly incredible after just 1 battle with the Roman legions. He forced Rome to abandon the northern Italian territories they had painstakingly managed for years. Hannibal also divided the captured Roman prisoners into 2 groups, one consisting of Roman citizens, and the other of citizens from Rome's allied states. Hannibal forced the Roman citizens to do hard labor all day, beating and insulting them, denying them food, and ultimately killing them brutally. As for the prisoners from the allied states, he treated them like honored guests. Not only did he provide them with enough food and clothing, but he didn't even bind their hands or feet. Finally, Hannibal said to them, "You can gain your freedom without paying any ransom, but I have only one request. When you return to your homeland, tell your fellow countrymen everything that happened here. Tell them that my only enemy is Rome. As long as you leave the Roman alliance and come over to my side, I will ensure you live well, eat and drink to your heart's content, and I will also guarantee the freedom, independence, and safety of your country." It turns out that this 29-year-old young commander was playing a long game. He understood very well that the reason Carthage lost the First Punic War was the Roman alliance. As long as this alliance exists, Rome will have an endless supply of troops and resources, so it is futile to ever hope to defeat Rome. This is why Hannibal was willing to go so far as to cross the Alps. He was determined to set the battlefield in Italy itself. He wanted to sow discord within the Roman alliance, so that its allied states would betray Rome. As long as the Roman alliance collapsed, he would no longer be facing Italy with just 26,000 soldiers against their 750,000. Since he was able to win over the Gauls, he believed he could also win over members of the Roman alliance. At that point, he would become the one with the greater military strength. So he decided to cross the Rubicon River and swagger through the Romans' own backyard, letting all the members of the Roman alliance see just how formidable he was. Of course, the Romans would never allow Hannibal to enter their territory unopposed, so they quickly assembled 4 legions to intercept him. This time, the army was led by the 2 newly elected consuls, because Rome never punished defeated generals. Many consuls who had lost in battle had the chance to be elected again and redeem themselves. Of course, the reason Rome didn't punish defeated generals wasn't to give them a chance for revenge, but rather to maintain social balance. This is because the 2 consuls elected each year were usually one from the nobility and one from the commoners. If either side's consul were punished for a defeat, it would cause extreme dissatisfaction among the punished faction, thereby intensifying the conflict between the nobility and the commoners. However, in the previous episode's battle, Consul Sempronius was defeated entirely due to his own lack of ability, so he never had the chance to be elected again. In the previous episode, the consul Cornelius, who was unable to participate in the battle due to serious injuries, was appointed as a proconsul and granted the same command authority as a consul. He led 10,000 soldiers to Spain, because Cornelius's younger brother was still in Spain with 2 legions, locked in fierce combat with Hannibal's second brother. Spain was crucial as Hannibal's base of operations. Since Hannibal had come to Italy, Rome decided to send Rome sent the 2 Cornelius brothers to Spain. For this expedition, Cornelius did not bring his own son, the elder Scipio, because noble children, when they first go to war, must follow their fathers, but after that, they are expected to learn under the command of others. Cornelius entrusted his son to a commander stationed in Rome, which gave the elder Scipio the opportunity to continue observing the opponent he would face years later. In 217 BC, the second year of Hannibal's expedition, Rome sent out 2 consuls, leading 4 legions to intercept Hannibal as he marched south. Since they didn't know which route Hannibal would take to head south, the 2 consuls acted separately, agreeing that if either of them discovered Hannibal's marching route, they would quickly join forces. Hannibal had an army of 50,000 men, and the 2 Roman consuls each led 2 legions of 25,000 men. Normally, a Roman legion consisted of 4,000 to 5,000 Roman soldiers, and with the addition of allied troops, the total number was less than 10,000. Because Hannibal was such a formidable opponent this time, and since a consul was only allowed to command a maximum of 2 legions, the only option was to increase the number of soldiers in each legion, so the 2 legions reached a total of 25,000 men. Hannibal chose a route that was shorter, but much more difficult to traverse. He decided to cross the Apennine Mountains and head straight for Florence. This was because the people living there were the Etruscans, who were extremely important in the Roman alliance, both in terms of their numbers and their seniority. If the Etruscans betrayed Rome, then a cornerstone of the Roman alliance would collapse. Crossing the Apennine Mountains was indeed much easier than crossing the Alps, but as soon as Hannibal got over the mountains, he encountered vast swamps. In the swamps, it was almost impossible to find a place to rest. The soldiers could only lean against dead horses or supply wagons to snatch a brief moment of sleep. As for Hannibal, he rode on the back of the only elephant he had left. For Hannibal, the hardships of marching were no longer the main challenge. What truly tormented him was an eye disease he had contracted. As a result, Hannibal lost sight in one of his eyes completely. From then on, this brilliant tactician became a one-eyed man. It took Hannibal's 50,000-strong army 4 days to make it out of the swamps. When the entire army finally reached Florence, they were at last able to get some proper rest. Hannibal immediately sent out scouts and learned that Consul Flaminius, leading 2 legions, was just 100 kilometers to the southeast. So he quickly devised a plan to annihilate these 2 Roman legions. Hannibal is the most ruthless one-eyed general I have ever seen. In just 3 hours, he killed more than 20,000 Roman soldiers. The brutality was so extreme that even the Carthaginian soldiers, who acted as executioners, could hardly bear to watch. When Hannibal learned that the Roman legions were just 100 kilometers to the east, he guessed that these 2 legions would not dare to confront him directly, so he came up with an extremely vicious plan. Hannibal did not head east to seek out the enemy. Instead, he led his entire army further south, pillaging, burning, and killing as they marched. These areas were inhabited by Rome's allies, and the thick smoke from the fires could be seen clearly, even from dozens of kilometers away. Consul Flaminius, seeing Hannibal acting so brazenly, immediately began to pursue him southward. He also sent an urgent messenger to the other consul, Servilius, who was still stationed in the east waiting for Hannibal, instructing him to quickly lead his 2 legions south to join forces with him. Moreover, considering that he might engage Hannibal in battle ahead of time, he ordered Servilius's cavalry to move out first and rendezvous with him. Tactically speaking, there was nothing wrong with this plan, but this time Rome's opponent was Hannibal, a tactical genius, and he certainly would not allow Rome's 4 legions to unite successfully. Hannibal moved with incredible speed, leading Consul Flaminius by the nose all the way south. Along the route, Roman soldiers saw nothing but the devastation left behind after Hannibal's brutal massacres. Rome was the leader of the alliance, so they had an obligation to protect their allies. In order to protect the safety and interests of their allies, but now, watching their loyal allies being ruthlessly ravaged while being powerless to help, the Roman soldiers felt deeply guilty. Hannibal felt that his goal had been achieved. Now, the Roman soldiers were solely focused on pursuing him and had let down their guard. It was time to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Between Florence and Perugia, there is a lake called Lake Trasimene, which is the largest lake in central Italy. To the north of the lake are rolling hills, and between the hills and the lake lies a narrow stretch of flat land. After passing through this flat area and traveling a bit further, you reach Perugia, the place where the 2 Roman consuls planned to rendezvous. Hannibal had already sent scouts to survey the surrounding terrain, so upon arriving at Lake Trasimene, he immediately gave the order for the entire army to camp at the foot of the hills, and forbade any fires from being lit. Hannibal positioned his cavalry in hiding at the entrance to the lake, his heavy infantry concealed at the lake's exit, and in between were the light infantry and Gallic soldiers. Then, everyone quietly lay in wait at the foot of the hills. Hannibal's intentions were clear. He wanted to lure the Roman legions into the narrow, elongated lakeshore, then block both the entrance and exit, and attack the Roman army from 3 directions. The only side without troops deployed was the vast expanse of the lake. After nightfall, Consul Flaminius led his 2 legions to Lake Trasimene as well. He didn't send anyone to scout carefully, he simply saw that there wasn't a single figure by the lakeshore, and assumed Hannibal's army had already passed through. Still, he was very cautious, and thought it would be too dangerous to march in such a place at night, so he ordered the entire army to set up camp not far from the lakeshore. On the morning of April 19th, 217 BC, thick mist was rising from the surface of Lake Trasimene, and visibility around the lakeshore was less than 10 meters. In these conditions, 25,000 Roman soldiers entered the area by the lake. The first to notice something was wrong were the Roman vanguard troops, who, without hesitation, engaged the enemy waiting at the lake's exit. The troops in the rear noticed something unusual happening at the front, but before they could figure out what was going on, Hannibal's cavalry had already blocked the entrance. Immediately after, the Gallic soldiers and light infantry hidden at the foot of the mountain also launched an attack on the Roman legions. This battle could only be described as a massacre. As the killing circle kept tightening, Roman soldiers began to jump into the lake one after another. Hannibal's cavalry used javelins to strike at the Romans in the water, and they were much more accurate than when attacking those on land. 25,000 Roman soldiers were driven to the brink of destruction by Hannibal's 50,000 troops. In this situation, Consul Flaminius was no longer able to command the battle. He fought bravely as an ordinary Roman cavalryman until he died a heroic death. After the battle ended, the corpses were piled so high that it was impossible to distinguish between commanders and soldiers, so in the end, even his body was never found. The slaughter lasted for 3 hours, and when the dust finally settled by Lake Trasimene, the scene was so gruesome that even the Carthaginian soldiers could hardly bear to look at it. Of course, if they had known about generals like Bai Qi, Ying Zheng, or Xiang Yu, who were fond of mass executions, what they saw before them would have seemed trivial in comparison. Out of 25,000 Roman soldiers, 17,000 were killed in battle. 6,000 Roman vanguard soldiers managed to break out of the encirclement, but they were soon pursued by Hannibal's cavalry, who had just finished the slaughter by the lake, and all of them were captured. Only 2,000 managed to swim across the lake and eventually made it back to Rome. As for Hannibal, he lost only 2,000 men, most of whom were Gaulish soldiers. The mercenaries he had brought from Spain were almost completely unscathed. The Roman Senate immediately convened a public assembly to announce this terrible news, but just 3 days later, they were forced to hold another assembly because there was still another consul on the battlefield. In response to the request of the fallen Flaminius, he sent out his own 4,000 cavalry to join up with Flaminius in advance. These 4,000 cavalry had no idea that at Lake the 4,000 cavalrymen had no idea what had happened at Lake Trasimene. When they arrived at the rendezvous point in Perugia, it was not their allies waiting for them there, but Hannibal's cavalry. As a result, half of these 4,000 cavalrymen were killed, and the other half were captured. Now Rome was left with only 2 legions without any cavalry, so they had no choice but to retreat and join forces with the 2 legions defending the capital. Only then did they barely manage to muster a force equal in size to Hannibal's. At this point, Hannibal was only 3 days' march from the Flaminian Island, and as he advanced along the highway built by the Romans themselves, he could soon reach the very heart of Rome. For those who struggle with procrastination, take note, you could actually call yourself a persistent decision holder, because many years ago in ancient Rome, there was a consul named Fabius. During the Second Punic War, when he was fighting against Hannibal, he was always slow and indecisive, taking no direct action, which earned him the nickname, the persistent decision holder. At first, this nickname was meant to mock Fabius as a procrastinator, but after suffering defeat after defeat at the hands of Hannibal, Rome finally realized that sometimes doing nothing is actually the greatest action. Being a procrastinator isn't so bad after all. In the spring of 217 BC, Hannibal wiped out 2 Roman legions by the lake. Everyone thought that Hannibal's next move would be to march straight for Rome's capital, but instead, Hannibal changed direction, bypassed Rome, and headed to southern Italy, where he proceeded to pillage and plunder Rome's allied cities. After Hannibal reached the Adriatic coast, he ordered all his soldiers to take off their own tattered clothes and put on the uniforms stripped from fallen Roman soldiers. This tactic greatly troubled the Roman legions. Later, the Roman legions had no choice but to shave off all their beards, because among Hannibal's troops, the Carthaginians, Spaniards, and Numidians all kept beards as a sign of masculinity. Hannibal didn't just care for his soldiers, he even bathed the army's horses with wine. As Hannibal's army marched south, entire villages were often massacred, and the loot they seized was so much that they couldn't even carry it all away. Now the Romans finally understood Hannibal's plan. He was deliberately committing atrocities in the Roman allied cities to provoke the furious Roman legions into attacking him, and then he would crush the Roman legions that came to challenge him. Seeing this situation, the allied states would then defect from Rome one after another. In the end, Hannibal would attack the Roman capital and become the new master of the Italian peninsula. For Hannibal to come up with such a strategic vision, he truly deserves to be called the father of Western strategy. First of all, Rome had trustworthy citizens in more than 70 colonial cities throughout Italy. If he didn't first cause the allied cities surrounding Rome to defect, he would very likely be attacked from behind when advancing on the Roman capital. In addition, Hannibal had always been provoking the Roman legions, and he was extremely confident that he would not lose to them. And in fact, that was the case. At least on Roman territory, he had never been defeated. Seeing Hannibal running rampant like this, Rome had no choice but to appoint a dictator. A dictator was someone chosen in addition to the 2 annually elected consuls, but with even greater authority, essentially a king whose term lasted only 6 months. Later on, Julius Caesar was so powerful that he was appointed dictator for life. Rome would only appoint a dictator in times of extreme crisis. The last time a dictator was appointed was during the previous crisis, that is, during the First Punic War. No one expected that more than 20 years later, during the Second Punic War, Rome would once again appoint a dictator to deal with Carthage. This time, the dictator was none other than the 58-year-old Quintus Fabius Maximus, known as the Delayer. He came from a distinguished noble family and had been elected consul twice, achieving brilliant victories in battles against the Gauls. Fabius was different from previous Roman commanders, although he appeared to be leading 4 legions into battle. The 4 legions were pursuing Hannibal, but they always kept a certain distance, avoiding direct confrontation with him, because every consul who had previously fought Hannibal was either crippled or had even lost their kidneys, and those defeated consuls were by no means mediocre figures. Fabius was very self-aware. He didn't believe he could defeat Hannibal. In fact, he thought that none of the current Roman generals were capable of beating Hannibal. So to avoid losing to him, all he had to do was not engage him in battle. Hannibal wreaked havoc in front of the Roman legions with utter madness, but Fabius simply refused to respond to Hannibal's provocations. Fabius intended to wait for Hannibal to wear himself out, to exhaust him to death in Italy. This tactic was certainly effective, but Hannibal was only 30 years old at the time, and it was actually the Roman allied cities that were suffering even greater losses. Because of Fabius's inaction, not only were the people of Rome's allied cities full of complaints, but even the Roman soldiers in Fabius's own army cursed his incompetence. They were deeply frustrated by their failure to fulfill the responsibilities of the alliance leader. As a result, everyone called Fabius the Delayer, using it to mock him as a procrastinator. It was only later that people realized that Fabius's approach was the only viable one, but now the voices against phase editing were growing louder day by day, and finally broke out in the autumn of this year. This was because Fabius did something that caused the Romans to lose all face. Hannibal is the most cunning general I've ever seen. While other generals fight head-on, Hannibal resorts to every trick and scheme imaginable. Who knows where he learned such tactics? To deal with Hannibal, Rome expanded its army every year. Hannibal began his invasion of Italy in 218 BC, at which time Rome organized 6 legions. The following year, 217 BC, Rome increased this to 11 legions. By 216 BC, the year of the famous Battle of Cannae, the number had risen to 13 legions. Meanwhile, Hannibal had only a little over 20,000 mercenaries brought from Spain, and a small number of Gauls who joined later. It seemed as if no matter how many legions Rome raised, it was never enough to stand up to Hannibal. In the autumn of 217 BC, by this time Hannibal had already been pillaging and plundering across the Italian peninsula for more than half a year. He planned to take his abundant spoils and spend the winter in the warm southern regions of Italy. The Roman dictator Fabius saw that his opportunity had finally arrived. because Hannibal's route had to pass through the Apennine Mountains, which run like a spine down the length of the Italian peninsula. Of course, Hannibal didn't need to climb over the mountains, he could simply follow the valleys to cross the Apennines. Fabius deployed his troops in several valleys that Hannibal might pass through, so that even Hannibal, whose very name could make children cry in fear, would have no chance of escaping unscathed. But Fabius still underestimated this young general. Somehow, Hannibal had obtained intelligence and was already aware of the Roman legion's movements. So when Hannibal reached the entrance of the valley, he told all his soldiers that the enemy was lying in ambush on the mountains on both sides. But tonight, they were going to pass through here no matter what. Even if the King of Heaven himself tried to stop them, it wouldn't work. Then Hannibal ordered his soldiers to gather a large amount of dry branches, selected 2,000 oxen used for pulling supply wagons, and tied the dry branches to the oxen's horns. When night fell, Hannibal had his soldiers light the dry branches tied to the oxen's horns, then drove the herd toward the mountain opposite to where the Roman soldiers were lying in ambush. Fabius thought the enemy was launching a full-scale attack, because from a distance it looked like countless soldiers were running with torches, but they were actually running toward the other mountain. Fabius did not want to fight at night, and since even if the enemy occupied a mountain, it would not affect his strategy of ambushing in the valley, he decided to wait until dawn to make further plans. That very night, Hannibal led all his soldiers and, without losing a single man, right under the noses of the Roman legions.
Subscribe to Animystika not to miss anything. Like and share, and join me right away for a new trip in history.